everybody. Nice to see you all, those I haven't met. I'm Louise. We decided we'd do this morning as an interview. If you know Ryan, he has a lot to say about lots of things, and so we're going to keep him focused and sharp. This is Ryan's family. Ryan, tell us a little bit, for those who don't know you, about yourself, but I want you to focus a little bit on your church stuff, obviously, and how you get to be sitting in this chair.
Great. Well, it feels weird to be in such an interview format with so many people I know quite well. But yeah, good to be with you guys this morning. So, in the context of Common Ground, the church was planted 21 years ago. I've been on staff for 18 years, and we have seen quite a bit of kind of growth and change to the leadership, to the congregation, to our staff, things like that. And I've had the privilege of being involved in a lot of those kind of shifts and changes and moves of God's grace and goodness to the church over the 18 years. Currently, I give leadership to the original founding congregation, Rondebosch morning congregation that meets here in this venue. Meets on Sunday mornings, and then I kind of oversee our kind of current 5 gifts to the city thing that we're doing as a church across our 9 congregations. Figuring out how we can bless the city by multiplying Christ followers, multiplying congregations, multiplying compassion and justice, cultural renewal, and church strengthening, particularly in the under-resourced suburbs of the city. So trying to figure that out, and we've got some good people working on that, so it's a privilege to oversee that. And then Rigby and I kind of co-lead Common Ground across the city. So that's a kind of newer introduction over the last year and a half. So that's a little bit of what I get up to. As you can see, family of 5. 3 kids, and a dog and a snake and a bird. And 3 kids that are now 10, 8 and 6. So hands full, lots of fun.
One of the reasons it's helpful to have Ryan here is because he's grown with Common Ground. So when you started, how many people were on the staff?
Not a lot. So in 2008, when I was asked to give leadership to the staff, the non-elder staff there were a total of 7 on the non-eldership staff. And then I think it took 4.5 years from 7 to over 100 staff. So those 4.5 years were ridiculous. So that was kind of a little bit of the shift in growth, and we started planting churches and really realized that we were substantially behind kind of the growth curve with the leadership and staff dynamics. So yeah, God was very good to us, and we just held on as the plane flew quickly.
Great, so he's going to try and dip into all those different stages as we go. So just to give you an outline for today, we're going to focus on 3 areas: strategic organizational leadership, an effective leadership pipeline, and staff team leadership. And I'm going to time each section so that we keep moving, because there's a lot to say under each one of them. And what we're going to do is after each section we'll have a time for Q&A, so you can focus on that particular thing, and we'll try and leave some time at the end so there can be general Q&A as well.
So strategic leadership lesson number 1 is when you get asked to speak on something, get someone who's way better and way more prepared than you to put PowerPoints together and ask you great questions. That's why Louise is here. She just is brilliant at these kinds of things.
Okay, so strategic organizational leadership. I mean, that's a massive topic. Where do you even start addressing a topic like that?
I mean, obviously it really depends on where you're at. If you're planting a church, I think there's strategic organizational leadership approaches that would serve you. I think if you are in a church and you're trying to say, how do we get more organized and how do we get more kind of on top of who we are and where we're going and things like that, I think the questions are different. I often say to people, when we're starting at scratch or from scratch, when we've got nothing in front of us, we've got kind of 4 steps in my mind that you should kind of investigate. The first one is saying, what is our vision? What are we trying to do? And once you figure out your vision, then you can start saying, okay, cool, so what are some of the strategies that will enable us to live into that vision? And then we start to develop structures out of those things, and then we can talk about staff. So vision, into strategy, into structures, into staff. I think that's a helpful way of going about things when you're working kind of from the ground up And I think so many people say, hey, we'd love to start a kids ministry. And then they go, well, let's find a cool person. And they hire a staff person to take care of their kind of, if there's no kids ministry, they just find a kids ministry leader and say, can you do that? And I would love to encourage people when it comes to organizational leadership, as the leader starting something new, you've got to start at a vision level. What are we hoping to achieve? Where do we want to go? What do we imagine this could look like? And then you say, okay, and how are we going to get there? That's your strategies and things like that. Then you put in some structures and then you find the right person to achieve that. So you particularly, or you might just get into a place of having not getting the vision that you're really hoping for. I think it's quite different. Patrick Lencioni, he's got some brilliant organizational questions. Organizational questions, do we put them on the thing? Yeah, there we go. Lencioni's 6 questions. These are brilliant if you are an organization or if you've already got a team or a ministry or that kind of thing, to really allow you to scrutinize where you're at and what you're doing and kind of take things forward. So his questions are, why do we exist? These are the questions of purpose. It's so important for us to realize what is our purpose on the front end. And then to move to how do we behave. That's kind of got to do with the kind of people that we are, how are we wanting to be experienced, those kinds of things. That's the character stuff. Then what do we do? That's our offering. So some people say, why do we exist and what do we do is the same, but it's actually not. I know a number of people that have created big businesses because they want to, their purpose is to employ people and create jobs, but their offering is to, pave roads or to build buildings or to, look at sustainable housing. That's what they do, but their true reason for existence is because they're trying to create jobs. So those kinds of things can be quite different. How will we succeed? That's got to do with your goals. That's got to do with your measures. In other words, what does success look like? So if you have, your purpose is to create jobs, but your offering is to, tar driveways or that kind of thing, your success measures is around how many people we've employed, not around how many roads we've tarred, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what does success look like has got to do with your measures and things like that. And then what's most important right now, that's got to do with your goals. That's got to do with what are we working on currently and things. And then lastly, who must do what? That's the great job of delegation, figuring out, do we have the right people on the bus? With regards to who the people are we're working with, and then also, are they in the right seats, doing the right things for the right reasons? Those are all important elements of that. So I think quite different when it comes to strategic organizational leadership. If you're starting something from scratch to the conversations of if you're trying to refocus what you're currently working on. So
I'm going to go off script already. So sometimes, people think, the church isn't an organization, it's an organism, it's a living thing, it's God's household. Like, how can we apply these management principles to the church? Just share some of your thoughts around that tension between organization and actually this is God's church.
Bruce Fordyce, I think, was the famous South African Comrades runner who spoke about preparing like scientists and running like artists. And I think a lot of the clash of that conversation is if we get too kind of structured and things like that, people can experience us not as pastoral and community and caring. They experience us as an organization. That's what we're trying to avoid. But I think one of the kind of classic things I often say in these kinds of talks or addressing groups of leaders and that kind of stuff is, the reality is if the church is too organized, it can hurt us. If the church is not organized enough, it can hurt us. And so I don't think we see organization as the problem. I think it's our experience of, and the way that we wear the organizational dynamics of who we are, that's important. So I think we should be organized like scientists while we run, experience life and experience each other in a community and being the church like artists, to use Fordyce's kind of thing. I think so often it's like if you bring too much organization into your Sunday experience, then it feels, sticky and it doesn't feel right. But if you don't have any of that organization on the back end during the rest of the week, we're not going anywhere fast, and we're often not as effective in what God's called us to do and be. So I'm not sure if that answers.
I've often heard Ryan say, we put systems and stuff in place, but we don't meet people with process, we meet people with people. And that's always been a helpful lens to me. I might have this brilliant administration system or this brilliant way of managing something, but when I interact, I'm still interacting with a person first. And I'm bringing them maybe into a process, but it shouldn't feel like it's a systemized thing. And I've always found that very helpful.
And maybe just one other thing on that too is we're kind of trying to remind everyone that we believe that structure serves life. We don't serve structure. And you've been into those moments where it's like, this is the process or this is the structure, and it feels so deathly. It doesn't feel like it's actually serving its purpose. It feels like we're serving it, and that's the wrong way around. We should allow structure to serve life and be able to channel life, but at the point where it actually becomes, the structure has become the biggest thing, we've got to do away with it, because that's not what God's called us to and to be.
I was just thinking about the home affairs structure. That can kill you. Anyway, okay. Maybe share some of your own key learnings as you've thought about the church in this organizational way. A few things that have stuck out for you. I had to rein him in here because he could do pages here. So.
Yeah. I do think, whenever you think about kind of strategic organizational leadership, again, you've got to ask big questions, like some of those things I mentioned earlier, but the kind of role of the leader, the type of organization we are, the mission that we're on, those kinds of things are all different. So you guys are training to be church planters. I want to know the question too, what kind of church would you want to plant? What gifts has God put in you as a leader? If you're going to be the point leader for planting this church or the lead couple for planting this church, actually a lot of what is going to shape what this kind of organization will look like, and I use that word lightly, I do believe the church is an organism, not an organization, primarily so we understand the life of Christ and the head of church. It's a body. It's, those are the biblical metaphors. Nowhere do we see organization in the Bible. So, but I use organization because I'm saying, talking practically, you'll know what we're referring to here. But I think all too often people say, we really like that model or the way those guys do it over there. But that hasn't taken into consideration the kind of church you're hoping to build, and it hasn't taken into consideration the kind of leader you are. And I think quite often the more life-giving dynamics come into play when you're clear on the kind of church you're trying to build and the type of leader that you are. So for me, I think that becomes very key. In the context of Common Ground, Rigby is a type of leader. He's your classic eagle visionary type leader. He's very kind of high level guy, leads a lot out of his devotions. Taryn is your classic pioneer, groundbreaking evangelist kind of leader, and I'm your more builder type leader. Big on team, let's figure this out, let's work this out, let's build. Now if Rigby, Taryn and Ryan each had to go and plant a church, I'll tell you straight away that all three of us would have some different ideas of the kind of church we're planting, and secondly, the kind of gifts that we would need to surround ourselves with, the way that we would need to structure things, leadership-wise, all that kind of stuff, because actually the lead couple sets a lot of the agenda around what the organizational side or leadership structures are going to look like. Now, I'm not stepping away from elders, deacons, saints, priesthood of believers, that kind of stuff. I'm just saying in the way you work that out day to day. I spend most of my week in the office, in meeting with people, connecting with lots of teams and things like that. Taryn works primarily from home, banging out amazing preaching series and things like that, and comes to 2-3 meetings a week where he then engages. Rigby kind of comes down from the tower from time to time. Been with the Lord, those kinds of things. But that's gonna work itself out in the way that you build team, in the way that you structure your meetings and things like that. So it's good to ask yourself, what am I trying to build? What kind of leader am I? I think one of the things that comes into that often is the model of church. So there's lots of models of church. There's single church model, multi-church model, multi-site model, campus model, congregational model. There's denominational models, there's movement churches. All of those kinds of models are different, and sometimes you can say, I'm choosing a model, and sometimes the model chooses your leadership. In other words, I'm this kind of leader, and that model really serves the effectiveness of my kind of leadership. And I don't think either of those things are wrong. I think you've just got to figure that out on the front end around what kind of church you're trying to plant, what kind of organization you're trying to build. And then I do think that the role of paid staff is absolutely key. I often say to people, man, if I was going to do it again, if I was going to start from scratch, who would I be looking for? And classically, if you're in America, you've got your 3 staff, you've got to have a preacher or leader, you've got to have a worship leader, and you've got to have an executive pastor, and hopefully a kids ministry person. If you've got those 4 things, you can plant a church. Those would not be the 4 that I would start with. I honestly, right at the beginning, would say that the pairing between a leader and a high-level implementer is the key responsibility. And if neither of those people are really good at, right from the beginning, helping us to articulate who we are and what we're trying to achieve, obviously visionaries can do that, but I would take a comms person, would be the 3rd person that I would add to my team. Because I honestly believe that we can do worship. We can do worship without worship leaders. We're all worshipers. And I honestly believe we can do kids ministry through the priesthood of believers. And I believe we can do most of what happens on Sunday without any of the staff people. And in the context of South Africa, most of us are not going to plant any churches with 5 staff. We're most probably going to be manalian out there with our wives saying, God has spoken, let's do this. And maybe if you've got a backing church, you're going to have the privilege of some resources, maybe some people coming with you. But I really believe that the kind of person who says, this is the dream that we're carrying, and the person who says, this is how we're going to make that happen, the person is able to help communicate that right from the beginning. So many churches, I think Common Ground, we totally got this wrong. I think at about year 12, we started writing down what we believe. At about year 12, we started writing down where we're going. At about year 12, we started writing down how things work around here. I don't know how we got to year 12 without, I'm saying I would, in year 0, in other words, before I planted the church, I would start to say to people, this is who we are, this is what we believe, this is where we're going. And compellingly, people come into that rather than you get a bunch of good people and then we spend years trying to figure out what we believe and where we're going and things like that. I believe that's the gift of leadership to any kind of starting, planting, whether it's an organization or it's the life of the church, that kind of thing.
Why comms, Ryan?
Yeah, comms.
So I think you multiply. So I see communications as a loud hailer. There's the world in front of you and you're trying to reach them. And yet you kind of can only do that with your own voice. And right now in the 21st century, we have the means to communicate with the world through social media, through websites, through online resources, through documentation, that we can make available to people. We can do some pretty radical stuff. I mean, you can put one person in a room with a bit of technology skills and they can make their message known to the world if they're good enough. And so for me, I think we kind of say, let's preach and hope that people will come. No, I think the comms role is actually helping us to solidify and define. And I'm not saying they're a techie person who is sitting behind a computer all day doing social media posts. I'm actually talking about a person who knows what it means to help us consolidate and articulate who we are, what we believe, where we're going, because it has a maximizing and multiplying your message. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can preach to thousands on Sunday 1 if you just put your recording on the internet.
Sure.
Most church planters for years have not had that privilege. And so how do we do that? That's why I say in our day and age, that would be the 3rd guy on my team. And I'm not saying he's going to be paid. I'm saying there's good people out there that know how to figure these things out and can help. And I think we've got to do that kind of stuff right from the beginning.
That's good.
You alluded to the implementer role. So for some people in the room that might be a bit unclear, can you unpack that a little bit? What is an implementer? What are the unique skills, the gifting that you would look for in that kind of role?
Yeah, so I think most probably, so years ago I wrote a document on VIA, the visionary, the implementer, and the administrator. I grew up in a context where my dad led a very small church. That's while I was in high school, and pretty much you had the pastor or the lead guy, and then you had an elderly lady who was the secretary. And that was kind of like how I think hundreds, if not thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of churches around the world operated. Yeah. And two things happen in that space. One, I believe we miss the number one responsibility of leaders in the life of the church when you're growing the church, which is recognizing the priesthood of all believers. Well, not every, but almost all of the epistles in the New Testament are written to the elders, the deacons, and the saints. It's the priesthood of all believers, and we're not called to monopolize ministry. We're called to multiply ministry. And so, for me, the kind of visionary is that person who is figuring it out. Often they're doing a lot of the preaching. They're doing a lot of the where we're going. They're spending more time with people and more time in the Word. And then I think the implementer is saying, how do we take that vision that we're aiming for and how do we cause that to be a reality? And they often adhere to their people. They're often quite practical. They're able to engage with the visionary. They're able to figure out and understand clearly where we're going. But then they're able to say, okay, and this is what we need to put in place to make that happen. The reality is that you get some leaders that have got that. So I lead a congregation here. I would call myself a visionary implementer. In other words, I kind of say, yes, this is where we're going, and I believe I have got the 9 steps to get us there, you know. Not everyone will agree with me always, but so whereas a Rigby or a Terran, to other of our leaders in the context, they are way more the visionaries, and they need implementive gifts to come alongside them. And so I've had the privilege of serving both of those men in different ways with more of an implementer gift for years at a time. Terran and I used to, you know, pretty much I would run all the camps and he would speak at all of them, and we were this dynamic duo, and we'd put on big stuff for Western Cape and, you know, calling all the churches together and running cool young adults and student stuff, and we were a team. That was beautiful. And then Rigby asked me to come and strengthen his hand, and so being that implementer of going, Rig, I think I get it. I'll go and work out how we're going to make that happen and put, you know, teams and staff and release the priesthood and maximize ministry, not monopolize it, etc., etc. So that's the gift of the implementer. And then underneath that you have administrators, and they're often the people that are just doing the hard yards below that. But I think we know what administrators are. Does that make sense? Question?
Yes. So you said skill set, because I'm trying to think how one would identify an implementer. So you said skill set, someone who's practical. Is there more to that? So you can identify someone who's
strengths finder helps. Implementers spot implementers. That's the first thing I would say. They've got a nose for who else is, and I would say the main thing in identifying a person is, and that person just keeps asking the right questions. They keep kind of going, no, guys, we've got ahead of ourselves here. Come back to over here. What does that actually mean? What are we hoping for over here? How are we going to see that work? They just keep asking the right questions. And generally, if they're asking those questions, you can trust them to say, hey, why don't you go and give that some thought for us? And then you see what they come back with. And 9 times out of 10, you're kind of like, yes, that will work. So who's the person in the room asking the right questions that are actually going to help us make this stuff happen? That's generally how, in my mind, to identify.
And I think they are the people that make stuff happen. So look in your congregation, they just, because their natural bent is to lean into action. So you give them a little thing and they just make it happen.
They're doers.
Yeah, they do it.
But I would just caution around there is a very big difference between the person who monopolizes ministry and the person who multiplies ministry. And the implementer is a multiplier of ministry. Their primary spiritual gift is delegation. If you can find the person who's going, let's pull that person in, let's give that to this person, let's do that. They are classic implementer. An administrator may be more as a person who kind of is like, okay, these are the things I will go and do. And you don't want that one very active doer to kind of do 90% of what's happening in the life of the church. You're looking for a true implementer who spreads that across lots of people.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this section.
Say discernment is his biggest gift.
Delegation.
Delegation.
Rich?
Can I ask a question quick? Ryan, about 6 years ago, in a whole citywide elders meeting, you drew the distinction of saying sometimes when there's a challenge, you throw resource at it, and you hire someone to do it, but sometimes the challenge is you need to put leadership towards, not resource. Do you want to just hold it, because it feels like when you have the resource, hire somebody, but that might not be the best first step. Do you want to just speak into that?
There's actually 3 killer M's. There's 3 killer M's that we naturally go to in trying to figure things out. The first one, most often, is money. It's like, money's going to solve all our problems. And so many church planters, I hear this all the time, man, if I just had more money, or I look at your church or the American church or whatever it is, and like, oh, they've obviously got money, so they can figure out all their problems. But actually, money doesn't solve things. Sometimes money can cause more problems. The second one, money management, is the second M. All too often what happens is we get into this kind of stage where we kind of over control things, and we like, if we can just set up this system of volunteerism, then we'll be a hospitable church. No, you don't just manage people into hospitality. You've got to lead people into hospitality. You've got to preach into that. You've got to teach into that. So money is a false kind of multiplier. Management can be a false multiplier. And then the absolute killer is momentum. Momentum is the third one. Momentum will derail any organization. When people see momentum, which is a beautiful supplement to what you're doing, if it becomes the substitute for what you're doing, in other words, hey, we're growing, la la la, that kind of stuff, I'm sure it'll be fine. You start to kind of not question yourself, you start to take things for granted, you don't put in the hard yards, and functionally what happens is that you undermine what you're trying to do. So throwing money at it, throwing management at it, or overstructuring it, or just riding the momentum, those can be killers, where actually I believe that both biblically and organizationally, it's the call to leadership. What does it look like for us to lead through this season? That's what takes us through the season, not just leaning on money, management, or momentum. Does that make sense? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Correct.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this section, but so this is a passion for you. How have you kept learning in this space, growing in this space? Like, what are some of the tips you could give the rest of us?
I think if you, it's just the basic principle, if you're hungry for something, then you go find things to eat. And generally, we live in a day and age where there is more good stuff out there readily available to us to learn in these kinds of things. Books to read, podcasts, that kind of stuff. This year I've started driving my son to school, and I was an Uberer before that. But now I've got this time where I'm driving him, driving back. We chat on the way there and stuff like that. When I'm driving back stuck in traffic, I've got a number of different podcasts that just, I find, keep me sharp in a few different areas. And selecting those based on the areas that you're wanting to be sharp in is a key thing to do. Books to read, and then I think exposure. I've had the privilege of going on 1 or 2 exposure trips. I think the day we start dying or declining is the day we start learning and getting inspired. So sometimes you can learn about how to do it better, but sometimes you just need to go and get with people that are ahead of you in an area. And so for me, I do that by visiting other churches that are ahead of us. And then one of the things is there are some brilliant guys in our church. When I say guys, I mean men and women, who in our church that I feel like I can learn from in these things. They've been doing it their whole lives long. And just saying, hey, can I buy you lunch and come and see where you work? It's such a cool thing. And then just asking them lots and lots and lots and lots of questions. And as soon as you get to the questions, you figure out, okay, what's going to be applicable to me? What's going to help me? And you often get quite inspired. And they are hugely encouraged by you as their pastor getting into their space, trying to understand what they do and what they're giving their lives to. And often pray with them at the end and say, hey, you're about God's work in this place. That just endorses them even more. But learning from others is absolutely key. Yeah.
Okay, so in the last few minutes, you can tell us your top books and your top podcasts.
Okay.
I had prepared him for this question.
So, I hadn't given thought to the podcast, sorry. So books, I think there are a couple of books that I just in this space would really recommend. Patrick Lencioni is one of my favorite people when it comes to this kind of stuff. And he's got a couple of books. The one is Death by Meeting. How many of us know that we spend way too much of our lives in meetings? Me particularly. He's got a brilliant book called Death by Meeting. And in that book, he just describes how to have meetings well. And I think most church leaders need to figure that out, else you'll waste your life in all the meetings that you go to. So Death by Meeting is a great book. There's a few others. The Advantage is most probably my favorite book by him. He speaks about a whole bunch of things around culture of how you're building a thing, the questions you're asking, the staff you're working with, things like that. And then multi-church, I would encourage, in answering the question, what kind of church am I planting? What am I trying to do? Where am I going? I think Brad House's book, Multi-Church, is one of the best churches. They pretty much are kind of re-looking. It came out about 18 months ago. I've spent some time Skyping with him, and they're pretty much trying to answer the question, what is the future of the multi-site movement look like? And they call it multi-church. And he really unpacks different kinds of churches in that book. That's why I feel like it would be a good read, because you can kind of go, yes, I feel like that's the kind of thing that God has wired me for. That's the kind of vision he's put in my heart. That's the kind of thing I'd want to build. And then you can start asking questions from there. I think podcasts that are good. There's a couple. I like the entrepreneurship type. Entre Leadership is one of them. There's some creative ones. I can't remember what they're called. Freakonomics is good. And then kind of Andy Stanley, most probably in this space, the church organizational world, he's most probably ahead of the game. He's got some Andy Stanley leadership podcasts, those kinds of things that are really good. And then I find actually going and listening to TED Talks about stuff that is good will often enhance things around what does that look like for us in the life of the church, you know. So whether it's leadership, visioneering, communication, those kinds of things, sometimes you can look up stuff there. Yeah.
Great, and I've also learned from Ryan the value of a book summary, that you don't always have to read the whole book, you can read the book summary.
Book summaries, that will change your life. I can't believe I forgot about that. But honestly, there is, if you go to christianbooksummaries.com, you pay an annual fee and you pretty much get between 1 or 2 book summaries a month. And he pretty much just takes the most recent good kind of leadership, Christian kind of thing, and he summarizes it into 12 pages and 3 pages called a nutshell. So generally I read the nutshell, it's the 3-page one whenever they come out, and then I decide whether it's worthy of 12 pages or not. But
If it's really good, then he buys the book.
hardly ever.
What do you call it? www?
Christian Book Summaries, I think is what it's called. Or Leadership Book Summaries, Christian Book Summaries.
Okay, we are about to finish this section. Are there any further questions that you'd like to ask under strategic organizational leadership? Great. Okay, feel free to keep interrupting as we go. The next section is an effective leadership pipeline. Okay, so yesterday I know you guys had Ricky with you and he mentioned the big 5. I thought maybe Ryan would just start there. You've worked with the big 5 as well. Is there anything that resonates there for you? Anything you've learned? Anything that's been valuable?
I think when I look at those different tracks, the best leaders are often marked by their top one, how well they lead themselves. I think what's going to determine your leadership is often going to be marked primarily by the top one. And then I think the one that's most effective in raising others up is the time spent with others. I've seen it time and time again, just there's nothing that can replace time spent with people that you wanting to invest in and stuff like that. And if we take the biblical approach of what Jesus did with his disciples, I think it's absolutely massive. When we try to build into others, it's just time spent. And I think one of the greatest grievances of size and busyness and things like that is I long for those days when it was the same 5 people and we were at the prayer meeting together and we were having coffees every week and we were figuring it out together and things like that. That was the little crew, and we sharpened each other so much. And some of the staff that I worked closely with over the years, the people who I get to meet with every week for a standard lunch meeting or whatever it is, I feel like my deposit in their lives is disproportionate to the people who I don't just have those regular times with. And so getting away, camping, setting up regular routines of being together. Nothing can change that for raising others up. You can do brilliant training and all that kind of stuff, but the truth is you're going to be half as good as the TED Talk guy on most subjects, and Papa's just around the corner with most of the other stuff. And you know, there's so much good stuff out there that I think are trying to equip people by teaching them is often not as effective as are equipping people by being with them and allowing them to catch something of our heart and hear how you address certain things and stuff like that. So that, I would say those two things on that.
Great. Maybe you can unpack a little bit a leadership pipeline in terms of eldership pipeline and explore a little bit, expand a little bit about the eldership training track that you're a part of.
Louis, I just caught a glimpse of the thing on your computer there. Maybe one other thing to say. I remember Roger Haynes, who leads one of the Common Ground congregations, he came up to me and he said, Ryan, I've learned a massive lesson. And I was like, what are you about to tell me? He was like, I've been reflecting on watching your leadership, and the number one thing that I've seen you do, which has somehow created opportunities for you to lead in different areas, is you just keep saying yes, and you just keep serving other people. And I was like quite taken aback. I was like, geez, that's very generous of you to say those things to me. But then I hadn't thought along those lines. But I would say when it comes to embracing responsibility, wherever you are as a leader, if you want to progress and move forward in your leadership, just keep saying yes to people asking you to do hard stuff, and just keep serving other people. And it's amazing how if you do those two things, I find the embracing of responsibility, you get muscled up. You know, and you that much, I think if you just keep serving, just keep serving, just keep serving, you know, other people appreciate you, you know, you're in the room more, all of those kinds of things. So maybe a last thing I'll think about there. Sorry, you were on to
eldership training. What can you tell us about that?
So I think some of the other guys have spoken a lot about the importance of eldership and those kinds of things. I thought maybe it'd be helpful just to speak through some of the practicals around how to do it. And I'm doing this under the kind of leadership pipeline type dynamic. I think obviously there's keys in trying to identify potential leaders, and that's observation. Nothing again can replace just getting with leaders. What am I observing in people's lives? Having a grid for what are you looking for. I'm sure you guys have come through 96 different iterations of the important C's, but when I'm looking at people's lives, I've got some important C's. What is the character of their life? That trumps everything for me. Man, you can be as skilled as you want to be, but if your character is not endorsing your thing, it's that leading yourself stuff on the front end. If your character is not endorsing it, that becomes a disqualifier for me. So what is the character? What are the competencies? What is the calling of a person? What is the clock? That's the season dynamic of which season of life are they in? Are they in the kind of early hours? Are they in the kind of sunset season of their life? Whatever it is. What is the kind of clock dynamic on their life? Understanding the chemistry that I have with them as a leader. That becomes very important. Sometimes I've seen people bring brilliantly capable people into their teams. They've got all the competencies, but the chemistry is still off. And statistically now, the Gallup Research Institute has proven through their research that the chemistry in a working relationship is disproportionate in determining the effectiveness of the outcomes. So you can put two brilliant people together that are 10 out of 10, and if they don't have a working chemistry, the output or effectiveness of their team will far underperform. If you put 5 out of 10 people that are totally firing and have got good chemistry, they will outperform 10 out of 10 people, just because of how much chemistry either helps or hinders, you know, kind of what you're trying to do. And so I think chemistry is a key C in a thing. So those are all things I would be looking for in identifying leaders, and that's always the first step in it. And then for us, we've got a leadership pipeline. That leadership pipeline tracks through the life of the church, from new members all the way up to elders and future congregation leaders even, and each of the increments has got a leadership kind of journey in the pipeline, if that makes sense. So how are we connecting new people through to how are we seeing people go from visitors to members? How are we seeing people become Christ followers? How are we seeing people go from not involved in leading anything to leading something, small group leadership training, all those kinds of things. through to being deacons, through to being ministry leaders or deacons, through to being elders, through to being church planters, and creating journeys for people to go in all of those things. And then I would just say, keep trusting the journey. So for us at an eldership level, we have a year-long eldership journey. It's made up of a few different components. Some of those components, again, are identifying the right leaders. There's some brilliant docs that have been written on what are we looking for in potential elders and leadership couples, and then kind of inviting them on the journey, all the kind of things that need to happen through that journey. So at Common Ground, we've got 10 kind of moments. So you start normally with connecting with a person, you end with connecting with a person one-on-one. Obviously you do more of that through there, and then there's 10 evenings that they would come on, and roughly half of those would be with me as the congregation leader, and the other half of those would be with some other gifts that we would want to expose these people to, and we cover key content through all 10 of those evenings. The other thing we get them to do is to read 2 books, Paul Tripp's Dangerous Calling, which pretty much just puts the fear of God in anyone around even considering being a leader in the church, which is good to do, counting the cost on the front end. That's a brilliant book. If you haven't read Paul Tripp's Dangerous Calling, you shouldn't be in the room.
Leave now. No.
I'm just saying, as far as counsel the cost, like, get that book. I'm not sure that one book has more radically got hold of my heart and the dangers of the inclinations of my heart and the traps of ministry than that book in serving me. So I'd really encourage you to get hold of that. And then the second one is I think it's called Faithful or Biblical Elders and Deacons by
Finding faith.
Yeah, Finding. There we go. Yeah.
That one.
That one.
Which is really good. I'd encourage you to check that out. And then we give them the mammoth task of, through that process, or maybe at the end, I give them like a research paper that they have to write. It's not a research paper. It's a paper, and I ask them all kinds of questions. It should be multiple pages long. All kinds of questions around their personal lives and devotions and walk with God and all. You just look at those Timothy and Titus passages and you just unpack every single element of what qualifies or disqualifies an elder and drill them on that stuff. And then, as far as their ministry and contribution, drill them on a whole bunch of that stuff. And then most importantly, drill them on a whole bunch of the most important theological questions. So I just ask them all the hard ones. What do you believe about divorce and remarriage in the church? What do you believe about evolution and the creation of things? What do you believe about the end times? What do you believe about women in ministry? What do you believe about tithing? What do you believe? There's about 25 hard questions. And the reason why it's so good for them to grapple with those things is because those are the exact questions that people are going to ask them. How can you be an elder not ready to teach the people into these things if you haven't had to personally document what you believe on these things? And that becomes a very important element and part of the conversation. So anyway, that's a bit of the journey there. And then just to finish the journey, coming out of that, the people who actually finish those things, if you can't take the time to finish that paper, we're not even having a conversation about moving towards eldership. In my mind, you've got to carve out time in your life for people, for eldership meetings, for all of those kinds of things. So giving you a hard assignment just helps me test whether you're able to carve out time and you've got enough of a heart to do it. So that's my little thing. And then we have interviews with those people, connections, coffees, meals, chatting it through, and then often it becomes a timing thing or not. And I'd say roughly half of the people that go through that journey, in my experience, maybe a little bit more than half, don't move on to being on our eldership team. And the some that do, we connect with them, then they start sitting in our elders meetings for anything from 6 months to 18 months, and then they come onto our team. So that's kind of how we do it around here. Very different over the years. I did not have one formal meeting, one formal piece of training. Rigby phoned me saying, "Hey Ryan, there's an apostolic guy who's going to be in town next Sunday. We'd love you to join the eldership team. You must have a coffee with him before you come back." So things have changed over the years.
Carl?
Just a quick question. Do you have, I mean, I might be throwing Ian Kruger under the bus here, but do you have that research paper questions?
For a small fee, we can make it, yeah, we do. He does have it, he just didn't send it to you.
Can you maybe send it to Dave?
Yeah, I'll send it to Dave, and he can send it on to everyone. I can do that.
And the answers to this.
Your personal convictions on this.
Ryan, can you tell a little bit more about sitting in on eldership meetings? Why that? And what is the value there?
And you guys laugh about that, but most of my elders are like, don't make us do it. Because we only started doing this like 4 years ago.
I didn't do it. Yes.
So-
When Ellen and I came on, we were like, whew.
Because I make the elders and their wives do it. And they both have to do it because I want to know where they're at on these important matters. And it's amazing how many conversation items we have. And the couples have said to me, even the ones that haven't come onto eldership, they said of the journey, the most valuable thing that they experienced was having to write those theological papers because of what it did for them in their marriages and in their own spiritual journey and development and living. So anyway, but it does take some time. What was the question? Sorry.
The sitting in. Why sitting in? How long? Like the value there.
So I don't think you can fully test chemistry and contribution, competency and things like that until you're actually asking a person to live in it a little bit. And so once they're sitting in our elders meetings, they're part of almost every conversation. They're part of, and we here at Common Ground, we do everything as couples. So we have all of our elders and their wives in all of our eldership meetings, thank you. And for me, it's just important to test the chemistry kind of stuff and to figure out how's this working, how's that going to work, what does their contribution look like? Do I feel like they're a wind in the sails of this eldership team? Do I feel like they're in handbrake unnecessarily? Do they say weird things at weird times? You know, all of those kinds of things. To me, it's kind of like, hey, you can be godly, that doesn't mean you're called to be on this eldership team, you know. Part of that's going to be whether we can move together as a team and what does your character, competency, chemistry with the team look like. And sometimes that can take a long time to figure out. And sometimes I'll have, so we've seen some great elders come onto our team just recently, and they sat in our elders meeting. So a year-long eldership journey, they sat in our elders meeting for 18 months. I had 3 really tough conversations with one of the couples through that journey, addressing some of the stuff that I felt at the time was prohibiting us from moving forward, but I felt like we could work through it. But it gave me the opportunity to work through all of those things on the front end. So standing there on Sunday, seeing them ordained onto the team, I was able to say, we stand here today with full confidence. And I think as a leader who's inherited an eldership team, brought some people onto an eldership team, those kinds of things, seen a lot of eldership teams established, I think when we're hasty in bringing elders and wives into our teaming, we can really hurt ourselves. And so for me, I've resolved to say I'm going to rather walk the long road and count the costs on the front end so that we, with full confidence, can put people before the church.
So when planting a church, especially if you're doing it with either a very small team or by yourself in a place, chances are the people you are going to start assessing to bring into eldership are friends that you make. But there is a danger with that as well. How would you say, like, to protect yourself from that? Because there's a danger of bringing someone onto eldership just because they're your friend, or having the difficult conversation of not bringing them onto eldership because they don't qualify, and then friendships die. What would you say?
So, I mean, obviously the biblical qualifications come first.
Of course.
And I think we do, especially in smaller contexts, we do just want to spend more time with people. And when you're a leader and you're carrying the church in your heart, if you're planting, what are you talking about? You're talking about what you're giving your life to. And so friends can easily come into that place where they're your confidants and you're chatting with it. But I think just to be clear on what are the biblical things on the front end, the able to teach one is often that trump card for me. Is this person really able to teach in an area, able to govern across the whole, those kinds of things? Is governance on their life? Are they able to teach? And then do they desire the office? That's the other biblical thing. And so with your friends, you're wanting to hang out with them, they can be safe places and things like that. the trick kind of in that thing is going, you're one of my best friends and I need you to remain a friend so that you can be a confidant and a support to me personally if there is that thing but you don't feel like they're qualifying. What I'm looking for in leaders is I'm looking for the people who meet the biblical qualifications. They often have got an area of strength that is different to mine that we're looking for, or they're able to serve a group of people that I'm not able to serve well. And then the question has to remain, do I just want to be with them? Do I enjoy the chemistry component of that? Not because we're best friends. So Alan, Lou's wife, is one of my great examples. Lou's husband, sorry, is one of the great examples in this for me. Alan and I are wired very differently. So on most probably 9 out of 10 conversations, we would pull in different directions, but some of the best people working together because our strengths complement each other so beautifully. And I just like hanging out with him. So I'm not saying it's because he's my friend, I'm not saying it's because he's the same as me. Those kinds of things become important. And using strengths, I'm a big strengths guy. Using strengths, a lot of the things you've got to look out for there is pace around differences. So who are the fast decision makers, who are the slow decision makers? You know, those kinds of things. That can often cause attention. But which eldership team doesn't need fast decision making and slow decision making at times? So who are those people in the room? Who are the people that are able to speak to different groups of people in our church? You know, all those kinds of things. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think you just got to look out for some of those bigger things and avoid the traps of kind of disappointing people by not being able to have the honest question.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure.
As advanced, I don't know if there are courses or material that is used to walk through people, like to get them to the place of eldership.
Yeah.
How long those courses take? Are they there?
Yeah. So there's actually a team right now, as we speak, working on, we were together in June in France, and out of that a team was commissioned to consolidate from about 10 churches that are really ahead of the game in the advanced world on this, consolidate all their material and make that available. We're busy building a website which has got a resource hub that we can put this stuff on, and then it's available to all churches. And most probably the most used one at the moment is PJ wrote an eldership training kind of track, and that's being used. He's trying to write it into a book, so he keeps not releasing it, but there are about 9 half-released versions out there. So
is it the world needs more elders, based on that?
it's actually called something else. Can anyone remember me? That will remind me. What's that? E+.
Is it E+?
I think it's E+, yeah. Well, E+ is kind of a journey, but I think the book or the curriculum is also called E+, and it's part of that. So it's Elders plus Elders in Training, and it's that journey. So different guys. I'd most probably speak to the guys in Joburg, Steve and Jack, or one of them, and get it from them. They've got the most. Yeah, and we can get you our whole thing. So most of our things is like there's pre-readings, there's content on the night, there's discussion stuff, there's a bit of homework, you know, that kind of thing. So over those.
Just a silly question is, maybe not silly, if there's a guy of good character and confidence and calling, but there's quite a bit of the same gifting in the team already, maybe 2 or 3 already. Now there's a third guy. Does that hinder you or us from bringing him in, or is it just what is your take on that? Would you rather try and invest in someone where there's maybe something short in your team and look for that?
Yeah.
For that
So I think if you look at inhibitors and accelerators, in other words, which things are going to push us forward, which things are going to hold us back, I think a lot of the time leadership is assessed by people coming into the life of the church and going, who are my leaders? Scripture calls them, consider your leaders, imitate their faith, you know, those kinds of things. But you're looking at these leaders and you're going, oh, these guys are all the same. Oh, so to be an elder looks like that. And if I'm not that, then I couldn't be moved into leadership or whatever it is. Or these guys all prioritize rugby and braafvleis. So this is the church for people who prioritize rugby and braafvleis, you know, that kind of thing. And that's where I think actually sometimes you've got to recognize that that can be an inhibitor to your growth rather than an accelerator if you have too many people that are the same. And so I think some of those conversations become important to have. How do we figure out meaningful ways where people get involved? And I do think, particularly in the context of South Africa, we have to go after different types of leaders, different cultures of leaders, different strengths of leaders, because when people are assessing their leaders, considering their way of life, imitating their faith, they can go, there's a leader that I can, you know, kind of aspire to be. There's a kind of leader that speaks my language, that acts like I act. There's a person who understands me. And they'll seek out those leaders. So I do think we have to work at that.
Okay, before we go off this section, particularly on eldership, maybe reflect on mistakes you've made in this area or lessons you've learned in the eldership pipeline, eldership journey.
So I get quite excited by spotting potential and talent in people. And I think a gift of a leader in raising leaders is being able to see something in people and call it forth. When I have done that in a way that has somehow promised them some promotion, or they've misinterpreted it as a promise for you will become something, that has really hurt me. So I can say, Lux, buddy, I honestly feel like you've got some gifts of leadership that God is going to bring to the fore. He's going to use that. You're going to run a church one day. It's going to be beautiful. People are going to look to your natural influence gifts. They're going to be drawn into that. That's going to be amazing. That's seeing it in Lux and calling it forth. If Lux heard in that, I'm saying you're going to become an elder in my church, that is a different message. And so many times I've got into the context where people have heard what they wanted to hear, not what I was trying to say. And so I don't want to back off for the gift of recognizing things in people and calling it forth. That's the gift of leadership, to call that forth. But I think you've got to use very clear language when sitting with people, because everyone's got hopes and aspirations for their life. And hey, maybe you could be an elder on my team. Does that make sense? Honestly, I've been with people and it's like 9 months later and we're having a chat and they're like, but Ryan, you said we were coming onto the eldership team. I was like, when did I say that? Help me understand. And I've realized just communicating very clearly is absolutely massive, because people have hopes and aspirations and they can get really disappointed. It can be quite painful. Secondly, I think when you overpromise and underdeliver. So on our eldership journey, I will tell people right from the beginning, I'm saying, guys, I love the idea that we're going through this leadership journey together. And only a few of you will actually emerge onto our eldership team. But this journey is going to be good for all of us. So don't hold on to eldership. That's not a prize. That's not the finish line, all that kind of stuff. What God's wanting to do in your heart, that's the prize. That's the finish line. Just get the messaging clear. So I think just creating those journeys in the most helpful way. And then I think one of the other lessons that I've been bitten by quite a few times is when I haven't been willing to face up to having the hard conversations when I needed to, they have come back around to bite me. And I can't remember which of the leaders says, if it smells funky, engage. If it smells funky, engage. If it feels like, hey, that person, they said that a little bit differently, were they really saying that? That person handled that situation quite clumsily, it was in a public forum, how do we do that? The first time, you can go and have a chat with them and work that out. I've found the times when I haven't done that, or I haven't engaged, I've kind of let it be, stuff like that. Down the line, it becomes much harder, and I haven't been willing to make the hard calls and engage with people and have honest conversations. I think the way to do that is also important. I often say to people, hey, there's soft truth and hard truth. Soft truth is in that prayer meeting, I'm not sure that was the best way to bring that across, and that really didn't help us. Hard truth is, if you do that again, I'm going to most probably have to publicly call you out on that, because I don't want to create a culture where that kind of thing is kind of good to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So soft truth is, hey, I think you can do that better. Forgive me for this one. It's all good. Do you hear my heart? Let's talk about that. Hard truth is, I will call you out next time. And how to bring that soft truth, hard truth is important. You know? So I've been bitten on that.
Great.
And then so I'll just say, not at the beginning of the leadership journey, asking the question of, do you think there's anything in our current existence and practice as a local church that you theologically disagree with, has really hurt me when I get to the end of an eldership journey and I'm sitting with their theological paper and we're not wrestling on a thing. They fundamentally are opposed to something that we believe. They're sitting on the other side of this issue. They've been through this long journey. There's been lots of conversations and affirmations. And the only thing now disqualifying for them from coming onto our team is that theologically a degree off, or some degrees off on this important matter. If it's a building block issue for us, I couldn't bring them onto our team. But it's good to throw that question in near the beginning. Hey, is there anything that you feel like are big building block things that you already know that we disagree with theologically? And start yourself there and say, hey, we're most probably not going to go on this journey because that for us is a building block issue, and we just couldn't see ourselves teaming together at this level. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And how do you handle that one? Because you're saying, listen, we're considering taking you on this track, but because you're not convinced of the baptism of believers, we are, we never knew that you're active, oh my goodness, you don't believe in the baptism of believers? Yeah. Anyway, and
he's really engaging in this role play.
And then you're saying, okay, but we want to take you on this journey. We see God's potential, the potential God has placed in your life, but sorry, we can't do that. How do you handle that? And because probably at that point in time, there's a good possibility that they'll leave anyway.
So I think the funnel, I'm not sure if you've come across the kind of funnel analogy on this kind of thing. In the context of common ground as a church, you can attend believing almost anything you want to believe. You don't have to be straight, you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to attend. Because it's whosoever may believe, and we're serving the city with the message of Jesus. So you can come on a Sunday. But if you want to become a member, you're going to have to subscribe to some of these things that we believe. And there's some things that are not going to change. What you believe about creation or evolution, what you believe about the end times, those kinds of things, even what you believe about women in ministry is not going to stop us from bringing you into membership. So the funnel's got a little bit tighter because if you're not straight, if you don't believe in Jesus, you can't become a member of our community, There's, then when it becomes deacons or serving in areas of ministry and things like that, so you can't serve in our kids ministry, on our worship team, any of those things without being a member. Then it becomes a deacon. If you're starting to lead a small group, oversee a sphere and things like that, we're actually now questioning a few other things. Do you really believe in the active work of the Holy Spirit? Do you really believe that that's going to function in the life of your ministry? Do you really, there's a couple of things. But when it comes to eldership, we're not just asking you those kinds of things. We're asking you a much deeper level of questions. And the reason for that is we wouldn't feel content in inviting you to come and shape what we believe, which is what the elders do. They define and shape what we believe. If we already know that you are outside of our orthodoxy on these important matters, and you've got to decide what those important matters are. Andrew Wilson's got a brilliant thing, what are the blood issues, what are the ink issues, and what are the pencil issues. The blood issues is that without Jesus there is no life. It's Him, He did it, it's atonement, it's the cross, it's those big things. Those are the blood issues. The ink issues are the things that we've written in pen. In other words, it feels quite contractual at this stage that we believe these things are like this, these things are like it. Baptism would be that. Could you still believe in the atonement and see Jesus in heaven one day having a different baptism theology? Yes, you could. It's not a blood issue. It's not going to save you or stop you from being saved. But in pen, we've written why we believe this, why we feel like this is what the word says, etc. And then there's the pencil issues. The pencil issues around how we evangelize. Well, This year it's Alpha, next year it's God Sessions, next year, we can just scratch and write those things out into the... If you start treating some of the pen issues like pencil issues, that's a problem. And some churches, I think many of us have come from denominational dynamics where they've actually taken the pencil issues and written them into the Blue Presby book as pen issues. And you're like, no, you don't have to do the service this way for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So those kinds of lenses and those kinds of conversations I think are really helpful. And I would just honestly say to people, so an example in our context with a couple is we allowed them to be active in the life of our church all the way up to being deacons in the life of the church, but they weren't able to progress on further than that because we had what we would call a building block issue that they were differing on, and we didn't feel like we would want to expose them as elders, in other words, those setting the doctrine of the church, defining the doctrine of the church in the context of believing something different beyond that.
Last question, and then we do need to move on.
Okay. You're planting a church, you have no elders, you're the only guy, how many elders, in your opinion, would be good to bring on first? Because bringing on 10, I don't think would be healthy. One might not be enough. Or how many should you work through? And of course, they all have to qualify. Whoever qualifies makes it in. But how many should you walk through that road with at a time, which would be healthy? I don't know if one is good, because if he doesn't make it, then you still have no one.
Back to zero.
Yeah. So I mean, I always say to people, 2 people is it's a debate, not a discussion.
Yes.
So I love to, right from the beginning, make sure that I'm having discussions, not debates. That's just my personal philosophy. But you don't have to make them elders to have those discussions and those debates.
Yes.
So if I was planting a church, I would most probably live in a season of working with the senior leadership team. Calling it that, don't use biblical language. Just use senior leadership team, and you as the planter are the person working with these guys, figuring things out, grappling, You can do anything you want under that umbrella, and out of that, I would say you decide then, what do you feel like is the right move? My hope would be, is the first time I ordain anyone into the team, I'd be ordaining 2 men onto that team, along with their wives. Now we've got a discussion.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That would be for me. Mbonisi, God's tribe, has just brought how many? 6 on. So they planted, 18 months later they brought 6 men onto the team. And in that moment, and pretty much they had been on a journey, a bunch of guys had gone through, and they actually waited a little bit longer and decided that they were going to be ready for all of them to be ready. And they brought 6 people on. But their church has exploded. I think they're gathering like 350, 18 months in.
So you spoke a bit about, there was a couple, they went on to the diaconate, but you couldn't bring them onto eldership. So is this like a step thing where you first go on diaconate, then to eldership, some make it over to eldership, or is it, if you can't touch an elder, we put you on diaconate, is it like levels, or is it, you know what I mean?
No, I think it's not levels, it's a grace thing.
Okay.
But often, because I believe in assignments before appointments, I believe Bible's clear on testing people and things like that. I think is, if they're not leading their family well, they're disqualified from, sphere ministry, deaconing in the life of the church, that kind of stuff. And I think a good testing ground in the life of the church is giving them sphere leadership. And if they're leading the sphere well, then come and help me lead the whole well, become something of that. So I would say, for us, the majority of our elders are coming out of our deacon pool because they've been leading in an area, they've shown themselves faithful, we've recognized that, and they're coming out of that. From time to time, God brings amazingly qualified people along, and it's kind of like, how do we actually recognize what God has gifted the church with? We don't want you to jump through hoops, those are ours, those aren't God's. And we can recognize and appoint a person like that. Yeah.
Can I ask my last
No, you cannot.
Fastest.
Wait
There's going to be
till
more
the end.
questions.
There will be more questions. We are running out of time, and I want to spend a little bit of time on staff team leadership. So Ryan, in your season, you've been involved in a lot of different teams, different sizes, different types of people. Feels like there's a wealth of knowledge right here. Maybe you can just share any thoughts around staff teaming dynamics, anything that's helpful.
This is, I know Louise is going to be doing a little bit more about this, but maybe just some highlight thoughts. I mean, this is a huge area of passion for me. The number one thing is, if you look, I mean, do you know what a bell curve is? So any organization pretty much goes through a forming stage. There's excitement, it's honeymoonish, they're figuring things out. Then they kick into systems and structures and things are happening and life is, teeming, and then it's like the sweet spot of everything that's happening and lots of things are happening and lots of people are recognizing the life and grace there. What happens is, when does the bell curve start turning back down is when people are like over-structuring, they're now starting to get too safe, they're no longer willing to take risks, what they've been doing is becoming a bit dull and boring, and people are used to it, and that, things start diving down again. At every single increment of that process, what is the most catalyzing dynamic that can kick things into gear? One word. That lives in the life of the people that you are dealing with, the staff, whoever it is, the number one component that can kick things forward is, come on Rich, tell us.
Magnets.
Risk. What?
Not risk. Come on, one more. What's that?
Vision.
Nope.
The Bible.
Nope.
Jesus.
The number one is ownership.
Write that down, write that down.
Is very important. I'm doing a total Rigby when asking you to guess. Ownership is so massively important, because if we are the church, owning who God's called us to be, owning what the Bible says about us, owning the mission that we're on, owning the vision that we have, you can cast great vision. If people just sit there kind of not owning it, nothing happens. And so for me, the number one thing that as a leader, you're trying to get into the life of your people, into the life of your staff, is ownership. How do we own who we are, what God's called us to, and things like that? So for me, figuring that out is a really a key ingredient when it comes to staff team leadership. Hiring the right people, vitally important. Honestly, guys, don't do it. If you don't go in your heart, you are jumping up and down to work with this person, don't hire them. Because most probably whatever you're feeling there is going to get kind of just worse, if that makes sense. And we've made too many mistakes where we've gone, well, we really need a person to do this. We haven't found the right person, so we'll just go with this person. That has really hurt us. It's cost us way more time and energy and all of that kind of stuff down the line, trying to figure that stuff out, compensate for the, whatever it is. So that's another one. And then I think a key thing when it comes to staff leadership is, how do you create that ownership? How do you create the dynamics of them living in a thing, wanting to be a part of this mission, and things like that? We work with millennials these days. The average working cycle of a millennial is?
6 hours.
You're talking about being in a job. How long? How long?
3 years.
2.3 years. They will change jobs every 2.3 years. And how do we keep those people? How do we keep them engaged? And we're not running corporations and companies here. The glory of what we're doing here is that we can own a much bigger vision. So 3 things. If you've listened to any of the Daniel Pink stuff and the EA stuff, they said there's 3 things these days that are keeping people engaged. The first one is mastery. Why is it that a young kid plays their guitar until the early hours of the morning? Nobody's motivating them to do that. What are they going to take away out of that? They're not going to take away anything other than mastery. Being given the opportunity to do something and master it is a huge motivator in our day and age. The second thing he says is autonomy is a huge thing. If I say to Garth over there, Garth, I want you to do this, and I want you to do it this way, and I want you to do it this way, and I want you to do it this way, and do it this way, and when you're finished, bring it back to me. Garth's kind of going, okay. When I say, Garth, here's the problem. I want you to figure out how we can solve that problem. Garth goes, okay, cool, I'll go figure it out. He's given autonomy to lead and to figure out and to contend for and to govern himself and manage himself and things like that. Autonomy in our day and age is the second major motivator. And then the biggest one in the context of the church, and I use this all the time, and there's a whole bunch of our staff in the room, so I'm giving away my secrets here. The number one motivating factor in the life of the church is his third point, and that is purpose. Purpose. In the purpose worlds where people are saying, man, I want my one and only life to count, and significance and all that kind of stuff, that's your kind of world that we live in today. And I think in the context of the church, we get to up the value of what we're doing. Guys, there is no other organization in the life of the world that can truly bring the hope that we as the church get to bring to the world. No other thing changes the composition of the human heart other than the gospel of Jesus Christ. And the vehicle that he has chosen to bring the gospel to the world is the local church. And we get to be a part of that. Purpose just shoots through the roof. Wow! I am a part of the most important thing happening on planet Earth today. The glorification of Jesus and the fame of his name. That's what we get to do. Already, you're pumping, right? You want to plant that church, you want to lead, you want to be part of the stuff. Eh? So the point is, I think when it comes to those kinds of things, giving people opportunity regularly to see the purpose of what they're doing is important. And here's a saying, write this down. You're going to use it in some of your thank you speeches this year. You can hire a person's hands. You can hire a person's heart. I mean, you can hire a person's head, their brain, their working and stuff like that. But every person volunteers their heart. Every person volunteers their heart. You can hire their hands, you can hire their heads, but they volunteer their hearts. And a beautiful dynamic of regularly recognizing in the life of a staff team, where have people gone beyond? Where have they gone beyond their hired hands? Where have they gone beyond their hired heads? Where have they volunteered their hearts? And if they understand the glories of the church, they will do that, right? So remind them of the high privilege of ministry. It's not business, it's not education, it's not government that is going to bring hope to our world, because none of those things change the composition of the human heart. So staff teams that are thriving are staff teams that carry the high privilege of ministry. I think one of the things when it comes to staff team leadership, and maybe I can draw this one, if that's possible. Let's get this over here. So I would say one of the other key things of staff engagement and keeping a good staff is challenge them. Challenge them. Generally in our day and age, way too many of our young people particularly are getting bored. They get bored and they change jobs because they think higher significance, higher contribution, higher meaning. If we can just keep the significance, meaning, challenge kind of things appropriate. So in the life of a very busy world, often what can happen is we can see staff on this kind of continuum, and the staff that are leaving are often the staff that are under challenged, right? They're under challenged, so they're kind of like, oh, I'm bored with this, and they leave. The other staff that are leaving are over challenged. They burnt out and like, I must take a break and sabbatical, I'm going to go do something else, right? And then you get this middle category, which is your appropriately challenged individuals. So, under-challenged, over-challenged, appropriately challenged. Where do people want to live and grow most? It's called the blue zone. The blue zone is just here above the mark of being stretched into over-challenged. Appropriately challenged, they're doing what they've got to do, they're getting on with it, things like that, but they're not actually growing or stretching or learning or challenging themselves. And so if we can find regular opportunities for most of our staff and leaders to find themselves in this blue zone, just above the line, in other words, they're having to figure out something new, they're having to take on a challenge, it's not going to just be easy, we're not just doing the same things again. If they can be in this place, that's the place of stretch, that's the place of growth, that's the place of having to figure things out and contend for something. And all the research and statistics and things tell us that that is the place where you create longevity in people. A second thing though, which is important with these kinds of things, is every good staff team needs to have an organizational pace style. What I mean by that is you can't expect people to run in the blue zone for 365 days of the year. Rhythms of rest, times of down and up only becomes sustainable if we recognize that the calendar has rhythms. And generally, for me, I would say you would want every person to have daily rhythms, weekly rhythms, monthly rhythms, and annual rhythms. Maybe you want to include termly rhythms in that. But that kind of stuff becomes incredibly important. So in Common Ground, we've got a number of things going on, but we really guard the downtimes. And so over school holidays and things like that, there's very little happening. We don't kind of say, oh, we can push through, there'll be enough people here. No, even the people that are here need to go into a bit of a slower time, have a bit more time available to them. And so for us, June, July, there's 2-3 weeks that are like that. The December thing is a big rest time. And then that enables us to push in the first term kind of things and the third term kind of rhythms and stuff like that. So I think it's just important to realize that you've got to have the challenge continuum, but you've also got to have the organizational pace style and draw those kinds of things back from time to time. Does that make sense? Cool.
Okay, so Ryan, we've got like 5 minutes left.
Sure.
And I know that Ryan has another meeting after this. So this is the last chance to ask any questions. Is there anything that you, from any of the areas that we've covered, that you'd like to go back to? Maybe you can ask your question now. You had a question.
Sorry, this is previous topic.
That's fine.
Would you ever advise for your planting, you appoint deacons before you appoint elders?
To be honest, I haven't given that a lot of thought, but I would imagine that if you as a leader are wanting to do what you believe God's called you to do, it would be easier to find and appoint deacons that can take care of real areas of ministry in the life of the church first. So I would say yes. I haven't pushed that through a theological grid on anything, so my mind would need more time to get there. But off the top of my head, I would say definitely likely ordained elders much quicker, deacons much quicker, and take a little bit more time to find the right people at the shaping, governing, pastoring, overseeing level. Yeah.
You spoke about to keep people engaged. One of the things, they must be autonomous for them to have the freedom to do what they want to do. At what time do you intervene if you see that they're not doing well?
Yeah. So I've got a little performance buys you freedom. It's not mine. I think Havels or one of those guys came up with it. It sounds terrible because we're not asking people to perform, but it's just the accent. So let's say Vota over there is a leader on my team, and I say to him, hey Vota, why don't you go and figure this thing out for us? Vota cruises in there and things are going really well, and it just feels like life and fruit is spurting from everything he's doing. How much do I need to engage as a leader? None. If I, 2 weeks later, am kind of like, I wonder if Vota's doing anything about that thing we spoke about. Or I start getting people saying, hey, what's happening over there? We just heard that something was happening, we weren't informed, questions are starting to be asked. Or I start to kind of figure out, no, that's not where I wanted to go, and Vota's gone in that direction. If it smells funky, engage. If you're not, in a sense, performing or achieving what we're doing, it's going to require me to get that much more involved. And I think generally this is where assignments come before appointments. I'm not going to appoint you to be the person who leads this thing before giving you an assignment on saying, let's test you a little bit in how well you do with this thing. And then either you're quite free to run with it, or I've got to manage you a little bit more, I've got to be a little bit closer to you. And generally, I feel like people find people they can trust to work with. And if you've got responsibility in your strengths, you find people who've got responsibility and you delegate easy to them because you know they're going to own it and they're going to figure it out. So I would just say performance buys you freedom. If you can trust a person they can run, let them do it. If you still need to kind of put some training wheels on and coach them, walk with them and all that kind of stuff, that's for their development. And at a time, hopefully you'll be able to release them to run. If you're 6 months in and they're not that person, find the person that can, because that person's hardwired to do something else fantastically. Don't frustrate yourself or them by just keep flogging the horse. You know?
You asked any question?
Right, with theological differences and then people kind of moving forward in leadership and with eldership, at what point do you think with those kind of couples that might be potential elders, is there a space of them going, hey, actually you well placed in the space that you are, you're not going to be stepping onto eldership? And or what point do you think it would be healthy to be like, actually, with your theological convictions, it's actually better for you to go to another church? So I guess more my question is it okay for people that have a calling of leadership on their life to be well placed because of those theological convictions? Or do you think there's a part of us that should be saying, actually, we're going to have a difficult conversation of going, I want more for you, and so I think there's a tension there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a tension there, and it's often got to do with the grace flow. So even with their convictions, is there a general experience of grace flowing to their involvement in the life of the church? Or is your leadership grace having to always flow towards them? Because they're stepping out of line and you've got to kind of come and fix that, and they said something that was unhelpful and you've got to go and kind of fix that, those kinds of things. So I think, I've had that exact conversation with more than one couple and trying to figure it out and saying, hey, why don't you go and visit some other churches? Why don't you? And most of those guys, in the context of leading here, have said, we've been to a few different places, we just don't feel like they're home. We're on the same page as you guys on these 9.5 things. It's this one thing that we're not on the same page with. And I'm like, okay, if that's how you're feeling, we can move forward. Here's the limitations of how we're going to move forward. And secondly, you've got to make sure that the grace is flowing to this community. Because if my leadership grace is going to continue to have to flow to your 0.5 issue, that's not going to work. And I'm going to then have to take things more seriously. So I think it's just figuring out the grace flow. There's some brilliant people in the context of our church that do have different things, but you wouldn't guess that the general grace flows to everything around them. And guess what? None of us have got perfect theology in this room. Not even one of us. Even if I said to you, we agree on 10 out of 10 things, the way we emphasize 3 of those 10 things is different. None of us has got the same theology. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have the blood and pen issues and stuff like that. Fundamentals, I think we just need to be humble and gracious with each other. Yeah, because I know you're wrong on some things too.
Sorry, we are out of time.
That's such a good one.
You can ask Ryan next time you see him.
When you're talking about admin and stuff like that, you've got to finish on time, else.
Yeah, otherwise Dave will never invite us back. So thank you, Ryan, for your time. Let's give him a round of applause.